Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something really interesting. It's a book that looks at truth, religion, enlightenment, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was really struck by how this author right away kind of throws you into the deep end with this concept that truth isn't always so simple. It's like full of these contradictions that you wouldn't think would go together.
Yeah, and they use this analogy about light and darkness.
Oh, right.
We tend to think of those as being completely opposite,
hmm
but really they exist on a spectrum, right?
Yeah, like two ends of the same thing.
Exactly. They're not really opposites at all. And it's kind of like that with truth, too. That to really understand it, you have to be okay with the fact that it can be complex.
Mm.
It can even seem contradictory sometimes.
I think that's a key takeaway for sure. You can't shy away from complexity if you're looking for truth. And actually, the author even goes on to say we should be looking for simplicity within that complexity.
Right, like they use another analogy about climbing a mountain. You know how from the bottom, all the paths up look like they're going in different directions.
Right.
But when you get to the top, you see that they all actually lead to the same place.
I like that. And then they go on to talk about the limits of words and logic. Like they acknowledge using words to explain all this stuff.
Which they have to do, right?
Exactly. But they say words can only go so far, especially when we're talking about these really big concepts.
Yeah, they compare it to using a hammer to tune a drum.
Oh, that's good.
Like the hammer gets the drum ready to make music.
Right.
But it's not the music itself. It's
Yeah.
just a tool. And reason is like that, too.
Yeah.
It can help prepare us to understand.
But it's not understanding itself.
Right. And then there's this whole section where they're critiquing this idea of followers in religion.
Oh, yeah. What was that analogy? They used a really good one.
Yeah, it was about people standing in the shadow of a lamp.
Oh, right. Right. They're so focused on arguing about the differences they see in the base of the lamp.
And they totally miss the light that's coming from it.
Exactly. It's like they're stuck in the details and missing the whole point. And then the author takes it even further. They start talking about how autobiography is kind of pointless.
After a certain point.
Yeah, like they call regular autobiographies ego biographies.
Because once you really know yourself,
Yeah.
there's no need for a personal history anymore, right?
Right. Like they're saying that real awakening is so powerful, it just erases the individual self. There's nothing left to write about.
And they have this example from history.
I think it was a Japanese saint.
Yeah, Lin Chi.
Linji, that's right. After he became enlightened, he had all the Buddha statues removed from his temple.
Because he was like, what's the point? Yeah.
Yeah, once you've reached that level of understanding, you don't need those external forms anymore.
And they also talk about this interesting dilemma that spiritual teachers face
Oh, yeah, like how do you teach something?
when the path to it might actually be an illusion.
Right. And they make this observation that people are way more likely to believe that something good is actually bad.
Than the other way around.
Which is so true when you think about it.
Yeah. It makes you realize how hard it must be to teach these kind of spiritual concepts.
Mm.
Because they often go against everything we think we know.
Definitely. And then there's this whole part about silence.
Oh, right.
You know how powerful silence can be? But they also say that sometimes you have to speak up.
Especially when you see someone about to walk into danger.
Yeah, they use that analogy of someone about to fall into a pit.
You wouldn't just stand there silently. You'd have to say something.
Right. And it's interesting because the author admits to struggling with this themselves.
Even though they wrote this whole book, they actually prefer to just answer questions.
Instead of just putting their ideas out there unprompted.
Yeah, it's like they feel this tension between the power of silence and the responsibility to help others.
I get that. Then they get into reincarnation, but they have a really interesting take on it.
Oh, yeah, the wave in the sea?
Right. The wave is like our individual self,
Wow.
and the sea is like this universal consciousness.
And true understanding is recognizing that you're actually the sea, not just the wave.
Which means you can escape that whole cycle of birth and death.
You become one with everything. And they also have this really different way of looking at time.
Oh, yeah. They don't see it as linear and fixed like we do.
Right. They say it's more fluid,
Yeah.
and it can actually be affected by your state of consciousness.
And they tell this crazy story about how they had to finish this 3-day fast from a past life.
But it took them 21 years in their current life.
Like what?
Yeah, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
It really makes you question everything you thought you knew about time.
You know, it's funny because we were talking about how the author presents truth as being eternal, but also always new.
Yeah, it does seem kind of contradictory at first.
Right. But the way they explain it is that truth itself doesn't change. It's just our understanding of it that evolves over time.
I see. So it's like we're constantly getting closer to the truth.
Exactly. And that actually ties back to their whole thing about embracing complexity.
Oh, right, because the truth has so many different sides to it.
Yeah. And as we grow and learn, we're able to see more of those sides. The author also gets into this really interesting stuff about consciousness. Like, they're saying that the way we normally experience the world is actually really limited.
You mean like our senses aren't giving us the full picture?
Exactly. They use this analogy about X-rays.
Oh, okay.
Like, for centuries, we had no idea X-rays even existed.
Right.
They're invisible to us.
Yeah, but they can pass right through our bodies.
And show us what's going on inside.
Hmm.
So the author's saying there could be all sorts of other rays of reality that we just can't pick up with our senses.
Wow. So what we think is darkness might actually be some kind of light that we haven't evolved to see yet.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
a pretty mind-blowing concept. And then they go on to talk about time.
Which we touched on before.
Yeah, but they really dive deep into this idea that time isn't this fixed, absolute thing.
They think it's more fluid,
Yeah.
like it can be affected by our consciousness.
Right. And to illustrate this, they tell another crazy story about a past life experience.
Let me guess. It has something to do with time.
Yeah, they had to complete this 3-day fast, but it ended up taking them 21 years in their current life.
No way. Seriously?
I know. It's crazy, right? It makes you wonder if our perception of time is totally off.
Totally. And they also talk about the soul. Like how it's not some static thing, but something that's constantly evolving.
Over multiple lifetimes.
Right. And they actually say that becoming aware of this connection between our past lives and our current life is crucial for spiritual growth.
Yeah. Otherwise, we're just starting from scratch each time.
Like being born with amnesia.
Right. Or like the author says, it's like inheriting a fortune but not knowing how to manage it.
So you might enjoy it for a while, but eventually you'll end up back where you started.
It's like having all this knowledge and experience from your past lives, but you can't access it.
Wow. So the idea is that by becoming aware of our past lives, we can unlock all that potential.
Exactly. And then they introduce this idea of conscious birth.
Like you can choose to be reborn.
Yeah, but not just randomly. You choose to be reborn for a specific purpose.
And they compare it to someone who willingly goes to prison.
To help the people who are trapped inside.
That's a powerful image. It's like the ultimate act of selflessness.
Right. And then they talk about how challenging it is to actually communicate these ideas.
Especially when they go against everything we think we know.
Yeah. The author even says they struggle with writing. They'd much rather just answer questions.
Because it feels less forceful.
Right. Like they
Mhm.
compare it to a teacher who chooses to work in a tough environment.
Because they know they can make a bigger difference there.
Exactly. And then there's this whole section about the future of religion.
Oh yeah, they have some pretty radical ideas about that.
They basically think it needs a complete overhaul.
Like it needs to move beyond all the dogma and tradition.
Right. They envision something much more universal.
So less about rules and rituals, and more about the actual experience of spirituality.
Yeah, they keep using this analogy of climbing a mountain.
Right, like there might be different paths,
Yeah.
but they all lead to the same peak.
And then they get really serious about the state of the world.
Yeah, they don't sugarcoat anything,
They basically say we're on the verge of collapse.
like materially and spiritually.
And they even compare our current situation to the time of Buddha and Mahavira.
When the world was going through a massive transformation.
It's a bit scary when you think about it.
Yeah, but it also makes their call for a spiritual awakening that much more urgent.
Like we're at a crossroads. And the choices we make now will determine the future.
They really believe that we have the power to turn things around,
Yeah, and they have this whole plan to train people to spread their message.
especially in the West, where they see a lot of potential for growth.
It's a pretty bold vision.
Wow, there's so much to process in this section. What really stood out to you?
I think the author's ideas about time and the interconnectedness of our past lives are just incredible.
Yeah, it really makes you question everything you thought you knew.
And that analogy with the X-rays, I thought that was so powerful.
Me too. It's a good reminder that there's so much more to reality than what we can see with our eyes.
Exactly. Like there are whole dimensions of existence that we're just completely oblivious to.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I love how the author emphasizes the need for a more universal approach to spirituality.
Yeah, especially in today's world where everything is so interconnected.
We need to find a way to bridge the divides between us.
And recognize our shared humanity.
This book has really made me think differently about the world. I'm curious to see what they say in the last section. Okay, so in this last part, the author talks a lot about spiritual enlightenment,
Yeah,
but they don't see it as this like step-by-step process.
right.
It's more like this sudden transformation.
Yeah, like a total metamorphosis.
Exactly, like the old self dies
Yeah.
and something completely new is born.
And they actually say that trying to write an autobiography after that would be pointless.
Oh yeah, because how can you even describe it?
It'd be like trying to put a dream into words.
Right. The events leading up to it wouldn't even matter anymore.
Exactly, because you're a totally different person.
So it's not about gradually learning and growing,
It's more like a sudden shift in your whole way of being.
like flipping a switch
Yeah. They use this analogy of water turning into steam.
at 100 degrees Celsius.
It's not a gradual warming up, it just suddenly changes state.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And the author also gives us some insights into their own journey.
Yeah.
Like they talk about how they actually used to question and challenge traditional religious beliefs.
Especially when they were younger.
Right. It wasn't like they were always searching for enlightenment.
It sounds like it was more of an organic process.
Yeah, like it came out of this deep curiosity about life's mysteries.
And a willingness to really confront the tough questions.
And it seems like their early experiences with death had a big impact on them.
Oh, yeah.
Like seeing people they loved pass away,
It made them really aware of their own mortality
which actually ended up changing their whole outlook on life.
and their relationships.
Right, because it freed them from this fear of loss.
They didn't feel the need to cling to things or people so much.
And that allowed them to turn inward and explore their own being.
They also talk about how they struggled to find a teacher who really got them.
Yeah, like someone who had also faced death and come out the other side.
It shows how much they valued authenticity.
They weren't satisfied with just blindly following someone else.
They wanted to experience truth for themselves.
And it was that constant questioning that really guided them.
Yeah, their whole approach to knowledge is fascinating.
It's not about collecting information or sticking to rigid beliefs,
It's more about this ongoing inquiry
always being open to new perspectives.
and trying to understand things on a deeper level.
They even describe answering questions as this kind of spontaneous unfolding.
Like if the answer just arises from this place of inner silence,
It's not something they have to think about.
it's more like an intuition.
And then they talk about the three gunas,
Tamas, Rajas, and Sattva.
which are these fundamental qualities of nature.
That influence how we act and how we see the world.
And they say that finding a balance between these gunas is crucial for spiritual growth.
Like you have to experience and then transcend each one.
Tamas is like inertia in darkness,
Rajas is all about activity and passion.
and sattva is purity and serenity,
And the author actually shares their own journey through these phases.
showing how they embraced and then moved beyond each one.
It's a good reminder that spiritual growth isn't about denying parts of yourself.
Right, it's about integrating everything into a whole,
Even the stuff we might see as negative.
because it all has a role to play in our evolution.
Exactly. And in the end, the author really stresses the urgency of their message.
They believe we're living in a critical time
A time when a spiritual awakening is absolutely essential.
for the survival of humanity,
They're calling for a global transformation.
like the kind that happened during the time of Buddha and Mahavira,
They truly believe that we have the power to change the world.
to create something more just and compassionate.
And they actually lay out a plan for how to do it,
By training individuals to spread this message,
especially in the West.
they see a huge opportunity for growth.
Wow, this book has been such a journey. It's challenged so many of my assumptions.
And two, it's made me question everything I thought I knew about reality and consciousness.
And the soul.
And it's given me this renewed sense of wonder about life.
It's like a reminder that there's so much more to discover.
If we're just willing to open our minds.
And I think the most important takeaway is that we have the potential to transform ourselves.
Even in the face of all the challenges we're facing.
The author really believes in humanity.
And that gives me hope.
Me too.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.
We hope you'll keep exploring these ideas and find your own path to truth and enlightenment. Until next time.